taken a whole name home with them. But those ones that they get at, look after.
owned the Hoedspruit Reptile Centre for the last 2 years. I'm sure many of you in the audience will know Chris. Give us a wave if you've met him before, if he's helped you with, there we go, snake duties. Thank you all for coming out on this chilly evening. We have people from Acorn today. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out. We have Wild Dog TV filming Chris's talk this evening. He is our guinea pig. They're just filming Chris though, not you guys, so that's fine. Who else? We need to give a big thank you as well to Lee and Vic. Thank you so much for hosting us. We really appreciate it, your support. Thank you. When Chris is done with his talk, we can have questions, and then when Chris has finished the questions, please give the staff 10 minutes to just clear all these chairs, clear the chairs away, and then they're going to put the tables here so we can all eat supper and stuff. So please don't rush straight to the bar and make orders. Just give them a couple of minutes to get the room back in order. But without further ado, thank you, Chris, and he's going to be talking to us about snakes this evening.
Thank you very much.
In case you need it.
Okay, sure. Okay, good evening everybody. Thanks for attending this presentation on snakes. I always like to start by asking people who here is scared of snakes. Put up your hands. Only 2 people, I don't believe that for a second. Okay, ma'am, why are you scared of snakes? Why are you scared of snakes?
It's just, I think it's because you hear of so many snakes biting people and being poisonous.
Okay. So snakes being potentially dangerous. Yes, some snakes are deadly. Have you ever been bitten by a snake? Have you ever been chased by a snake? Has a snake ever done anything horrible to you?
No.
So why are you scared of snakes? So the point here, everybody, is that most of us are scared of snakes, and it's really an irrational fear. We're scared about snakes because of what we think we know, and most of what we think we know is actually wrong. Misinformation spreads faster than scientific fact, and if you just go onto Facebook, even for 5 minutes, you're going to see a whole bunch of rubbish. This misinformation fuels people's misunderstandings when it comes to snakes and other reptiles and things. Okay. I've got a lot of information that I want to offload on everybody tonight, so I'm going to get straight into it. But first, a bit of a background. The centre was opened in 1984 as Swadini Reptile Park. Did anybody go to the centre back then? 1984 when it first opened. Okay, we're almost 40 years old. I mean, this place is an institution. In 2006, the name was changed to Kamai Reptile Centre. Again, in 2015, it was changed to Kinyonga. And then when we took over in 2019, we decided to change the name one last time to Hoedspruit Reptile Centre. So we're all the same institution. We like to say that we're an old organization with a young heart, and you guys will see a lot of really cool things coming out of the centre over the next 40 years that we have it, and then we'll pass it on to somebody else, make it their problem. But for now, we're going to do what we can. Okay, what is a reptile? What makes reptiles different from any other group of animals? Any ideas? You can just shout out your answer. Yes?
Cold-blooded.
Cold-blooded. Okay, what else? Scaly. Okay, so these things, scales and cold-blooded. This is what separates reptiles from most other animals. Now, of course, when we say a reptile has scales, it's not the scales like a fish. It's hard, dry, keratinized scales. It covers and protects the body, and it creates a pretty much impermeable barrier to moisture leaving the animal. And it protects them from abrasion, from the environment that they live in, but also from predators. When we say a reptile is cold-blooded, we also don't mean that the blood inside their body is cold. We mean that they're ectotherms. In other words, they regulate their temperature by using an outside environmental source. Moving into the sun if the lizard is cold, and moving out of the sun into the shade if the lizard is hot. So these 2 unique things make reptiles very different from most other animals. Now, this is a very basic taxonomic breakdown of reptiles. You can see that there's 4 orders in the class Reptilia. We are going to be looking at Squamata, this one here, and this has the bulk of the reptiles. There's a stack of species that are found in this group. It's very diverse, and of course we are here today to specifically look at snakes. Birds, in case you didn't know, are actually quite closely related to reptiles, more so to crocodiles than anything else, and this is because of a common dinosaur ancestor that they share from many, many years ago. Okay, let's have a look at a snake. Now, a snake has a very simplistic anatomy. It's generally a long tubular kind of shape, and the reason why it's long and tubular is it allows the animal to negotiate its environment very easily. You can split the body into roughly 3 basic parts. The tail of a snake contains the reproductive organs. Okay, alongside that is the actual physical body, and believe it or not, they've got the same organs that you and I have. They just look very, very different. At the top end of the snake is the head, and the head contains everything you imagine a snake's head to contain. So it's got teeth, it's got gums, the nose, the mouth, venom, and venom glands if it's a venomous snake. If we peel back the layer of skin, we find a layer of muscle, and underneath the muscle is bones. Many people ask us, do snakes actually have bones? Yes, they do. Very simple skeleton, a lot of bones in the head, and then the rest of it is really just vertebra and ribs. And there can be, even in some species, over 1,000 bones in an individual snake, depending on what it is. So snakes have a ton of bones. Snakes also have organs that are specially designed for their own environments. Typically, when we look at reptiles, we talk about a primitive heart, and heart, when it comes to snakes, is 3-chambered. Now, this doesn't mean that it's less efficient as a pump. And the role of a snake's heart is to pump blood around the body just like it is with anything else. But it's a 3-chambered heart with 2 atriums and 1 ventricle, unlike a mammalian heart or a bird heart. This picture here that you're looking at is the inside of a snake lung, and this is also quite unusual. Snakes don't have alveoli or bronchioles. That's the cauliflower-like structures that we have in our lungs. So for a snake, oxygen diffusion takes place directly in this spongy sort of material, which is only present on the front third of the snake's body. The second 2/3 acts as a sort of hollow chamber, which allows the snake to really breathe in a huge amount of air and utilize it as it needs it. So really only one long working lung on a snake for many different reasons. Now, there's also a lot of other technology locked into the biology of snakes, and one of my favorite things is the head. A snake's bottom jaw is really in 2 separate pieces. It's not fused together like yours and mine is. It's in 2 separate pieces, and it actually can be split into 2 additional pieces on either side, so 4 individual little bones. Connecting the bones in the middle is an elastic ligament, as well as at the back, and this allows for a massive degree of movement. What do you think the movement's for? Why do snakes need 2 pieces of jawbone instead of what we have? Any ideas? Swallow their food, exactly. So snakes, as we know, can swallow animals that are 2 or 3 times, even 4 times, sometimes bigger than the size of their own heads. Does anybody know why a snake starts at the head first? It doesn't get stuck. You believe it or not, even if they get it wrong, which some snakes do, nobody's perfect, and they kind of swallow butt end or something like that, most snakes are able to get that meal down eventually. But you're quite right. Starting at the head allows the limbs of the animal to fold back in a very streamlined kind of way. Whether it's arms and legs or feathers or wings, most animals really become quite streamlined if you start swallowing at the head first. Remember that snakes are vulnerable when they eat. They can't bite back in self-defense. They can't run away with a big rodent in their mouths very easily. So the snake has to swallow its food as quick as possible with the least amount of energy expenditure, and then it disappears in the bush and you don't see it for a couple of weeks while it's digesting its meal. How is it possible, though, that a snake is able to swallow such big things without choking? Any ideas? Okay, it's because of this thing here. This is called the glottis. It's an extension of the trachea, of the windpipe. And believe it or not, snakes can actually take this windpipe and extend it out of their mouths. It kind of squashes between the 2 bottom jaws, and it is reinforced with little O-rings of cartilage, and that prevents the windpipe from actually being squashed. The snake can then easily breathe over maybe 5 or 6 hours if you're a big python and you're swallowing an impala. And this is, of course, critical for a snake to be able to do this kind of thing. So really interesting adaptations allowing snakes to swallow the animals that they need to. Any ideas what snake's on the screen? Spotted bush snake. Well done. Guys, spotted bush snakes have round pupils, and most snakes with round pupils are diurnal snakes, so they're active during the day, and they're also active foragers. It's not the case for every single snake, but this is a bit of a rule of thumb. These snakes can see in color as well as black and white vision. They've got cone cells as well as rod cells, and of course snake vision is generally not super good, but it's better than what we give credit to. As soon as the animals move, the snake vision really kicks in, and these animals are able to spot things very easily. So if a snake that you're trying to identify has round pupils, chances are it's diurnal, active during the day, and it's an active forager. It has to chase after its food, grab onto it, immobilize it in some way, and then swallow it. Snakes that have vertical pupils, like this egg eater here, are generally nocturnal by nature, and they tend to be ambush hunters as well. And if you think of things like lion, leopard, they all have these vertical shaped pupils. It's a better design for a nocturnal existence. Of course, these are a bit of the exception. If I'm talking about egg eaters, they don't ambush anything. You know, you don't sit and wait to ambush eggs. You've got to go out and look for them. So here's again another exception. Okay, how does a snake smell? With its tongue. So if that's true, why do snakes have nostrils? For breathing. Now the truth is, snakes have an open palate, and that means that their nostrils are directly connected to the inside of their mouths via their palate. If you take your tongue and you push it against the roof of your mouth now, you will feel a sealed closed palate. That's an adaptation that mammals have so that we can suckle when we're young, so we can feed. But there's no parental care on this kind of level when it comes to reptiles, and generally we see an open palate. So just by breathing in through the nose, the snake is going to suck into its mouth tiny particles of scent that comes into contact with that super sensitive Jacobson's organ. I'm sure pretty much everyone here has heard of this organ before, and it gives the snake a very brief understanding of what is in its environment. But it needs more information than that. So out comes the tongue. No taste buds, no taste receptors. The tongue is not used for tasting. It's used to transmit scent particles that are in the air onto the Jacobson's organ. Now the reason why the snake has a forked tongue, if you look very carefully, is it allows the snake to determine direction, because whatever side of this fork picks up the more numerous scent particles, it will tell the snake that that's the direction that the meal is coming from, or the predator or water, or whatever the case is. So when you see a snake foraging, you'll see that tongue flickering in and out of the mouth all the time, the head moving from side to side, and the snake is slowly homing in onto the direction of what it's looking for. Now this picture here, a bit graphic, it's the roof of a snake's mouth. And the snake was hit by a car. It gave us a good opportunity to take a picture. What I want you to look at is this little cavity here in the roof of the mouth. This is where the Jacobson's organ sits. And it's a bit misleading because it gives you the impression that it's a separate organ like a kidney or a liver or something like that. It really is just the nasal chamber that's lined with specialized cells. Have a look, there's a groove going before the Jacobson's organ and there's a groove after it. This little groove very brilliantly assists the tongue in sliding in and out of the mouth very, very easily. As the snake flickers its tongue out of its mouth, it's collecting particles of scent. It then gets brought back into the mouth, and each side of this forked tongue fits very neatly in the corresponding shape of the Jacobson's organ, transferring that scent, allowing special cells to interpret it and send it to the brain via the nervous system for interpretation. Snakes have an exceptionally good sense of smell. This is what it looks like from a side view. By the way, I didn't say this in the beginning, but I poached a lot of pictures from the internet. I'm just putting it on. Don't sue me. So, tongue flicking in and out of the mouth, brought back into the roof, exposing that Jacobson's organ to the tongue, getting rid of some of these scent particles, and all of a sudden we've got a very efficient way of this kind of animal for smelling. How do snakes hear? Okay, vibrations, but how does it work? Any ideas? If you look very carefully, right over there, you will not see any ear openings. So snakes don't have ears. It does mean, luckily, that if you ever encounter a snake and you get a big fright, you can scream your lungs out. It's not going to influence the snake's behavior. How the hearing actually works is they do detect vibrations. Snakes used to be lizards, okay, more or less. About 120 million years ago, they shared these common lizard-like ancestors. And these animals were living under the ground at the time. And living under the ground comes with a lot of other different challenges. One of those challenges being that dust and dirt was constantly getting into their ears. So slowly over millions of years, the ear holes got smaller and smaller and eventually disappeared. But they still retain the inner ear bone that their lizard-like ancestors had all these years ago. So a snake would naturally sit with its head against the ground or against a branch in a tree, something like that. And here we come moving around the bush, give off vibrations. They travel through the ground onto the snake's jaw and onto the inner ear bone. And this is how a snake hears. So it's very effective. It's why you generally don't see snakes when you're walking in the bush. Even when you're trying to be careful and quiet, these animals are able to detect these kinds of vibrations. Okay, anyone seen this kind of thing before? Has anyone been to countries where they do snake charming? You've seen it? What's going on here, do you think? Do you think the snake is really dancing to this guy's tune? Okay, so you're right. It's not really. It is a trick, of course. This is a cobra. This cobra lives in this basket. It's under a constant state of stress, and when the guy exposes the cobra by opening the lid, the snake wants to escape, because that's what snakes do. And because it's a cobra, it immediately faces the most threatening thing in this snake's environment, and that's the guy. Now, what the guy wants you to think is that he can play a special tune with this flute and actually hypnotize and get the snake to dance. That's the trick. What he's really doing is moving that flute in a very skilled way, moving his foot here and his hand here, and it really appears as if that snake is actually dancing. Here's the problem. This guy's dealing with a toxic snake. If he gets bitten, he's going to be in trouble. So to prevent a bite, these handlers generally catch the snake behind the head, rip out the fangs or break the teeth off, sometimes even literally amateur surgical procedures removing the venom glands, and in other times people sew the snake's mouth closed. And this is also that they don't get bitten by the snake. Now, of course, this isn't the same snake, just an illustration that people really do go through these lengths to do things like this. So if you are over in a country that does snake charming, guys, don't give money to people that do this performance. It encourages it, and it's very bad for the snakes. Pretty much all the snakes that are used in this kind of thing will die. They'll die from an infection that becomes systemic, starting in the mouth and then moving through the rest of the body, or from thirst or hunger as well, because they can't eat. Okay, moving on. Some snakes have an additional sensory set of equipment in the form of heat-detecting pits. You guys have heard this on television and seen it on television sometimes. This is really special, and not all snakes have this. The pit viper family of snakes, okay, have large heat pits located between the eye and the nostril. Some people might mistake it as an ear, because that's the obvious extra sort of hole that we would associate with, but they are in fact heat pits. Pythons and boas also have the heat detecting capabilities, and on these snakes they're found on the bottom jaw on the side of the snake's face and on the top jaw in front. Now, the reason why these snakes have this is to help them catch and locate food. Both snakes, okay, if you have a look carefully, are nocturnal, and both snakes are ambush hunters. Now, the problem with an ambush hunter is if you miss your target, you might go hungry and you might not get lunch ever again. So your entire survival depends on you being able to pinpoint with absolute precision where you need to bite that animal so that you can catch it and actually feed. These ambush hunting snakes, they're generally not designed to move quickly. In other words, to travel over a long distance. They're designed to strike very fast and be accurate in it. So, some snakes have the heat detecting pits. In South Africa, there's only one species. Any guesses? The python. Southern African python has heat detecting capabilities. Nothing else has it. These pits are so sensitive that they can detect a temperature change of 1/300th of a degree. That is industrial thermometer level crazy, right? Yeah, of course, they can really see exactly where their food is. We believe that these snakes can create some kind of mental picture, a bit like how you see it when it's shown on National Geographic or something like that, and it enables the snake to eat very easily. Okay, now much about how a snake perceives its environment is done through its sense of touch. We kind of sometimes believe that snakes have these really dead hard scales, but that's not true. Reptiles have got sensitive scales. They've got nerve endings and a blood supply that go into them. It's only really the outer layer that's dead. In snakes, there's two basic kinds of scales: smooth scales, which are found mostly on heavy built snakes and very fast snakes, and there's keeled scales, which are mostly found on ambush hunting snakes. Do me a favor, take your fingernail. Can you touch your fingernail very lightly with your hand? Can you feel that? Even just the slightest touch, your fingernail can detect it. If you squeeze it, you can feel pressure. They can even feel temperature. So really, as a snake is moving through its environment, it's constantly getting information about what's going on. Let's have a look at an example here of a snake with smooth scales. This is an anaconda, so this is not a South African species. How cool is this iridescence, though? You get this on a lot of snakes. If you've ever seen a Southern African python basking in the sun is scattered across the microscopic structure in the snake's scales, and it reflects this beautiful color. The keeled scales, however, don't do the same thing. This time, when they are exposed to sun, they produce a very matte appearance. And this makes a lot of sense because keeled scales, okay, have this thickened ridge that run lengthways across the scale, and this is generally what we find on ambush hunters, something like a puff adder. Now, if you're a puff adder and you're lying in ambush in the veld and the sun shines on your skin and all of a sudden you become shiny in appearance, you're going to give away your position to your predators. So generally, smooth scales, heavy snakes and fast active snakes, and keeled scales on ambush hunting snakes. Okay, anyone know why snakes shed their skin? to grow well done. Snakes also shed their skin to help repair the body and also to remove parasites. But essentially, a snake sheds its skin in order to make room for new growth. Now, believe it or not, you guys shed your skin all the time. Probably never thought of it this way, but millions of skin cells fall off our bodies all the time. A snake and a lizard don't shed this in the same way. It's shed periodically in one go. Now, you can always tell when a snake is about to shed its skin by looking at its eye. Its eye goes this opaque bluey color, and we actually call it in the industry in the blue. And what is happening is the body is secreting a special liquid that helps detach nerve endings and blood supply that go right into the last layers of the skin. If the snake didn't go through this possible, then shedding wouldn't be possible. It would hurt, it would bleed, and it just wouldn't work. Scale that covers and protects the eye. So no movable eyelids on snakes. We're looking onto the eye cap, onto this kind of liquid that's being secreted, and then onto the scale underneath it. In about a week or two, the snake reabsorbs this liquid and the eyes go clear, and the snake is then ready to shed skin. And when snakes shed their skin, they do so starting at the top and kind of crawling all the way out of their skin in one long whole piece. The snake pushes its head against a rough object like a rock or a branch. You can see here how this big scale covers the eyes peeled backwards, and eventually ends up looking a little bit like this. I like this photo because it really shows just that last little layer that's shed. By the way, everybody, when you find a snake skin in your garden, it's always going to look a little longer and a little wider than what it actually is. And that's because on living snakes, the scales are overlapping, but when you find skin in the bush, it's very different. So it's always a little bit inaccurate. Okay, if you think you've got a 10-meter python on your property, probably don't. It'd be great if you did, but you probably don't. Now, of course, snakes reproduce like anything else. It's generally triggered by a shift in climate. So it's either the arrival of the rain, or weather, and it gets the snakes moving around. Now, special scent trails let the males know that they're now receptive and ready to mate. At the same time, the male gets this instinct to move around. That's going to increase his chance of picking up on a scent trail, and eventually a male will lock onto a female. Now, he's got to catch up to her and he's got to chase her down, but she never she wants to know that this is the fittest and strongest male. She's going to run away from him. He's going to be all those except the male, and they will do their thing. Now, this picture, I have to apologize for the quality. This is what it looks like when two green mambas bump into one another, but this time it's not a pair. This is two males. So now there's competition between the individuals and they want to fight. But it makes no sense for a snake to bite one another when they do this combating. Neither snake wants to risk a piercing blow from a nice sharp fang into a vital organ. Also, the venom in one green mamba is the same as it is in the next green mamba, so it's completely pointless using your venom as this kind of mechanism. So the snakes do a similar thing. They wrap their bodies and they coil around one another. The male tries to pin the other one down, and eventually the fittest, healthier, stronger male will win. The weaker male will disappear off into the bush and try to regain some of his energy that he's lost, while the victor will go and find the female. So no biting really in this kind of thing. Now, this is a very strange picture. Guys, believe it or not, these are the sex organs of a male snake. And yes, they have two. Okay, they're called hemipenes. It's a paired organ, and what's unique about it, or what, not unique, what's unusual is the series of hooks and barbs that cover each one of these hemipenes. This is a dead snake that we cut open during necropsy at the center, and we were able to manipulate the hemipenes out so that we can take the picture. But these barbs prevent interspecies from breeding with one another, so a green mamba is not going to be able to breed with a black mamba because it forms this lock and key kind of mechanism, and only species of the same kind are able to then mate. It also prevents the snakes from detaching in an awkward moment, and this ensures that fertilization actually takes place. Now, you're probably asking yourself, do they use them one at a time, or how does it work? They only use one at a time, Scientists believe that snakes produce sperm in their testes much in a similar way that ovaries are produced, or eggs are produced in ovaries, one side at a time. So the snake will know that the sperm on this side is the most viable, and it will use this hemipene. If it locates a female very shortly afterwards, he can use the sperm in the other side, always ensuring that he's using absolute healthy mature sperm when he's mating with the female. It also allows the male snake to access the female's cloaca or whatever side they happen to be laying on. Again, things become a bit strange and awkward when you don't have arms and legs, and it's definitely peculiar. This picture here shows two rattlesnakes that are mating. So this is the female and this is the male. Now, sometimes the female doesn't always settle. This instinctive drive to move around is so strong. So what ends up happening is she drags the male by his penis all over the bush, up into trees, over sharp rocks. Extreme kind of situations. Okay, let's have a look. This is also a rattlesnake. This snake is giving birth. Now, we say giving birth in a very loose kind of term because to give true live birth is very rare when it comes to reptiles, and we call that viviparity. Animal that is viviparous, the baby or the embryo that develops is normally drawing nutrition directly from the mother via a placenta, and that's normally not what the case is when it comes to snakes and other reptiles. This snake is in fact producing a series of eggs that don't have an eggshell, and what's happening here, I'll do my best to point it out, these are yellow things are the actual eggs, and the embryo is drawing nutrition from the yolk via that vascular tissue, and the one right at the top here is a unfertilized egg. Generally, if there's any unfertilized eggs left over after the snake has given birth, mum will go back and try and eat a bunch of them up, because often she won't eat at all the entire time she's carrying these babies, and that can be as long as 6 months in some of the species. So it's a huge burden on the female snake. But essentially, they house these internally incubated eggs, they carry them around, and when they're ready to give birth, they kind of push them all out. The babies rip open this membrane that they're housed in, and then they're completely brand new miniature little snakes, and they can do everything that adults can. Remember everyone, baby snakes can still bite. Baby snakes in some cases can be more toxic than the adults. They don't need to be taught how to catch food or how to defend themselves. All of this is pre-programmed in this instinctive brain that snakes have. Now, this is something quite unusual. Obviously, now we have a whole bunch of snakes that can give birth to live animals, and then we have snakes that lay eggs. And a reptile egg can have a hard shell or it can have a soft shell. Snake eggs generally stick to one another, and they are soft and leathery in nature. And normally a snake will choose a nesting site, lay the eggs, and that's it. They're off the hook. Very little parental care whatsoever. Some pythons around the world actually coil around their eggs and they twitch their muscles. The twitching of the muscles generates heat, and this heat is then actually transferred onto the eggs. So these moms are really good in snakes sort of terms. They actually help incubate the eggs in a very effective and brilliant way. This picture here shows a little Mozambique spitting cobra hatching. Now, hatching is also a problem if you're not a bird with a hard beak and a hard shell that you can kind of pick open the egg. This happens using this little thing here. It's called an egg tooth. Now, the snake has to rub its face on the inside of that shell backwards and forwards until it makes a little incision, and then it can poke its head out the egg and escape out into the world. These snakes, when they do hatch, they normally hang around the egg, or in other words, not leaving the egg physically for a couple of hours. Yeah, again, they're completely independent. They don't need to be taught anything. Everybody still with me? Okay, this is one of my favorite subjects, snake defense mechanisms. The reason why I like this is it really shows the lengths that snakes will go to avoid confrontation with anything that they can't actually eat. There's no benefit whatsoever for a snake to bite something that it can't eat, especially a person. Now, if you're going to get bitten by a snake, that snake has to get close to you. And the closer it gets to you, the easier it is for you to turn around and kill that snake. And snakes know this. They see us as a predator. So the threat of a bite is far more effective than a physical bite itself. And because of this, snakes have come up with a whole host of different warnings. Let's have a look at some of them. Can you guys all see the snake in this picture? Anyone want to take a stab at what kind of snake it is? It's a gaboon viper, absolutely. There it is. Look at how well camouflaged that snake is in the leaf litter. So snakes can defend themselves by having cryptic colors and sometimes even being able to disguise their smells. But essentially, the snake will really defend itself by remaining out of sight and out of mind. And so many snakes are usually naturally colored because of this. So we have this use of camouflage as a defense mechanism. Both the vine snake and the snouted cobra make use of illusion of size. Now, this is when a snake changes its appearance somewhat to appear larger and more intimidating. Now, if I'm a snake predator, I'm going to be fully aware of the consequences of eating a snake. And if this snake that I'm trying to eat all of a sudden doubles in size, then so does the risk. As the predator, I'm going to take a step back and say, you know what, maybe it's not worth the risk. I'd rather let this snake go and I'll eat something else. So snakes have a very good defense mechanism when it comes to changing their body appearance. Many snakes also distract predators, often giving them an opportunity to escape and run away. And I love the example of the spitting cobra because this is such an effective defense mechanism. By the way, guys, snakes don't spit into your eyes so that they can come and attack you afterwards while you're vulnerable, okay? They spit into your eyes because the venom is designed by nature to be incredibly uncomfortable and painful. And the first thing the person does, or any predator, is blink and close their eyes, and they're completely concerned about what's happening with their face, not concerned with what's happening with the snake at all. The snake then doubles back, takes the opportunity to run away, and the predator has no easy way of following the snake. Okay, so it's purely a defense mechanism. You can see here that the venom leaves the fangs in two pretty powerful jets, but then very quickly spreads, and it just takes one little blob of that venom to get into your eyes to cause a problem. Okay, so it's very effective. Some snakes have other interesting defense mechanisms. It's the ability for an animal to play dead. We call this thanatosis. This is the rinkels. We don't find rinkels in Hoedspruit, but snakes often will turn their bellies upside down, exposing usually some kind of bright color or pattern, and they pretend to be dead. Now, the theory behind this is if I'm going to eat a snake and I have any kind of interaction with it and all of a sudden it dies, as a predator, hang on, maybe I should be concerned. Maybe that snake is sick. Maybe if I eat that snake, I'm going to all of a sudden die. Best to leave this one alone and go look for something else. Some snakes have the ability to voluntarily bleed out of their mouths to be extra convincing, whilst others release bad smells out of their cloacas. So, multiple things happening all at the same time, all to convince their predators that we're dead, better leave us alone. Now, it's not uncommon for the animal world to advertise the presence of toxins by using color. We see this with frogs and toads, we see this with insect species, and we even see this with some fish species. But generally, an animal that is brightly colored is toxic and is best left alone. Any ideas what the snake is? Okay, tiger snake. Very common snake in Hoedspruit. Who doesn't love a tiger snake? So, these snakes are not dangerous to people. They are venomous, but it's a very mild venom. It has no consequence even to most of their predators, but their predators don't know this. So they look at these colors, they think, you know what, we're going to leave this guy alone, and it's very effective. Now, many snakes can also give warnings through sounds, and none of the snakes around the world is more famous, in my opinion, than the rattlesnakes from America for this kind of thing. So if you get anywhere near a rattlesnake, you get into its comfort zone, it thinks maybe you're going to stand on it or you haven't seen it, it's going to rattle that tail. It's quite a loud noise. You hear it from a distance, and immediately that snake is saying, hey, I'm here, don't stand on me, but also just walk around me, take a wide berth, don't interact with me on any kind of level. The python, our pythons and our puff adders, these guys make hissing noises, and if you've ever had an encounter with any one of these snakes, it's really intimidating, and it's a very good defense mechanism. Now, the truth is, because snakes are eaten by so many different animals, they need defense mechanisms that they can communicate to a lot of different species in different species languages, right? So snakes are always communicating these warnings, and multiple things are happening. I broke them down into individual little steps just now, but lots of things are happening. Let's take a black mamba, for example. First off, a black mamba is a long, thin snake. It uses its speed to avoid detection. A mamba is not going to let you get close to it very easily. It's also grey, which is a very well camouflaging color in the bushveld. If you just think of every time you've lost an elephant or a rhino behind a small bush in Kruger, and that's a rhino or an elephant, not a snake, So it has the ability to get away, and it has the ability to blend in. If you confront a black mamba, it stands up, spreads a narrow hood, a bit like a cobra. That's the illusion of size coming into play. If that doesn't work, the snake opens its mouth, showing off the pitch black inner lining. That's aposematic colors, and if that doesn't work, the snake is hissing, it might strike in your direction, but you really have to ignore all of these warnings and do something silly like physically grab onto the snake or try to kill it, and that's the only time a mamba is really going to bite. Yes, accidents do happen when people accidentally stand on one or something like that, but that really is the exception. Okay, moving on to venom and venom apparatus. Snakes are split into different families depending on what kind of dentition they have, so what their teeth look like. And the most primitive form of venom delivery is basically belonging to the Opistoglyphus snakes. Okay, that means that the rear-fanged, and I hate the term rear-fanged. It reinforces this illusion that the fangs are in the back of the mouth. Have you guys ever heard of the myth of a boomslang not being able to bite you because it can't open its mouth wide, or it only bites on the earlobe or between the fingers? I always find this very strange. Why are snakes biting people on the earlobes and in between their fingers and nowhere else? But nevertheless, that's the myth. These snakes can open their mouths very wide. They can most definitely bite an envenomated person, so don't be fooled by the guys on Facebook that pick up snakes and then post it on the group. What is this? I don't know what it is. You know, the snake tolerates it when it's certain species, but don't ever do that. Let's have a closer look. Here's a cross section of the fang. It's got this little groove that runs down it. The fang is not in the back of the mouth like the name suggests. It's more or less in line with the eye, kind of in the center. If you look at the picture here, this is the boomslang example. You can very clearly see exactly where those little fangs lie. Now the venom duct connects the fang to the venom gland, and it's a special gland on the back fang snakes, and these snakes don't have the ability to inject venom under pressure like many other species do, so they can't choose exactly how much they want to inject every single time. So it's a very primitive way of delivering venom. The snake has got to bite onto the animal that it wants to eat. It's got to lacerate the skin by chewing a chewing kind of action, and then very slowly the venom travels from the venom gland down the duct and into the fang. And because of this, many people that have been bitten by boomslang are able to rip the snake off of their bodies and not be envenomated. It's still effective for the animals that they eat, it's just not the most effective way. This is a little bit more advanced. The Pteroglyphus or front fixed fang snakes, these are the Mambas and the Cobras. Now a big difference here, we see an evolutionary shift from the fang being below the eye to a little bit further forward. That means it's much more accessible to the snake than the rear fangs are. And you can see that this little cavity has deepened almost to the extent that it's completely closed. Not quite, but almost. And that allows for more venom to travel through the fang, and this time the fang is connected to a venom gland that is surrounded by muscle. So Mambas and Cobras can actually choose exactly how much venom they want to inject every time. Have you ever heard of a dry bite? Okay, that's when a snake is stood on, accidentally gets a fright or something, or whatever the interaction is, bites as a warning, but doesn't want to waste that venom on something that it can't eat. And they can do that because of these sort of muscles. Now, a little bit more advanced than that is the vipers and the adders. Okay, we call these snakes Selenoglyphus snakes. Now you can see the fang has moved a little bit further forward once again. It's right at the front of the mouth in the easiest position that it can use. The second evolutionary change is that these fangs have grown in size. They're humongous fangs, so big that they have to be stored against the roof of the snake's mouth when they're not being used. Otherwise, they would hang out of the snake's mouth, they would get caught on debris and branches, and the exit holes where the venom comes out would get blocked, and it would be a disaster. So the snake stores the fang against the roof of the mouth, and when they need it, they can unhinge them, expose those long fangs, and deliver a venomous bite deep into the tissue where it will have maximum kind of effect. Now there's another adaptation for all of this. Remember that eating for snakes is dangerous. Any animal that a snake eats is also going to want to defend itself and retaliate. So venomous snakes have this ability to bite, inject venom, release and pull back, and allow the prey animal to succumb to the venom, and then go look for it and eat in peace without the risk of being bitten. When it comes to these snakes with the large fangs, it's very possible that that fang could hit a piece of bone or cartilage, get stuck and wedged. So as soon as they unhinge to bite, they also unhinge to release this fang out of the prey animal to pull back to an appropriate distance and then wait for the venom to do its job. Okay, once again, huge cavity. This time it's completely sealed, and we've got very, very large venom glands on adders and vipers, which is the reason why they have these very different shaped heads to most other snakes. So lots and lots of venom being able to inject with these kinds of guys. Now, of course, not all snakes are venomous. This is the skull structure of a python, for example. About 120 teeth inside a python's mouth, all curving backwards. That's so that when that snake bites onto the animal that it wants to eat, all those teeth hook in. It gives that snake a split second that it needs to wrap its body into coils and really start squeezing. Now, they don't crush their prey to death, they don't break any kind of bones, and it's not even really asphyxiation in the way that you might imagine. But the pressure that is exerted in those coils is so strong, it actually stops the blood from flowing. And if the blood doesn't flow in the prey animal's body, then there's no oxygen reaching the brain and they pass out very quickly. That means that this is an extremely efficient way of catching prey, and these snakes can often kill animals even faster than some of the most toxic snakes. The disadvantage is that you've got to use your entire body, and that rodent or that squirrel can easily turn around with big incisors and bite and cause some damage. But they're super efficient, and the plus side, I guess, is that you then don't have to go look for your food afterwards, because you're physically holding it. Black Mamba finds a squirrel in the tree, bites it, the squirrel bounces all over the place, and before you know it, that squirrel's 20 meters away, and that snake may not find that squirrel. So different adaptations. 4 rows at the top, 2 rows at the bottom, and as I say, not venomous, but still lots of teeth. Okay, one of the pictures I poached off the internet. Guys, does this make sense to everybody? It's a really cool picture because it explains the true difference between poisons and venoms. Many languages around the world don't make this distinction. Venom in Afrikaans is gif. Am I right? There's no venom and poison in Afrikaans, for example. I think it's all the same kind of word. So it's the case with many languages. However, in English, something that is poisonous has to be ingested. So poisonous frog, poisonous mushroom, poisonous plant, you've got to eat these things before it becomes a problem. Anything that's venomous has fangs or stingers, like bees, wasps, spiders, scorpion, snake. They all have to inject their venom into the body before it becomes a problem. Okay, now venoms are pretty complex. There's lots of different types of venoms, but essentially they are made up of amino acids, proteins, and enzymes. So quite simplistic in nature, but also very complex. Each and every one of these little protein molecules is designed by nature to have an interaction with a certain prey animal. And that's because snakes eat a huge variety of animals. They eat frogs and toads, they eat rats and mice, birds, their eggs, they eat spiders and scorpions, some species, and one of the biggest predators that snakes have is often other snakes. So what may work on one animal may not work on another. But because of all of this, there's lots of different types of toxins in snake venoms. But generally, we refer to 3 venom types. We refer to neurotoxic venoms, which are nerve affecting, cytotoxic venoms, which are cell and tissue destroying, and hemotoxins for blood affecting venoms. Now, there are many species that have what we call cocktail venoms. So there's an overlap of symptoms that can be expected. Sometimes it's cytotoxic neurotoxic, like a spitting cobra, for example. Sometimes it's cytotoxic hemotoxic, like a puff adder. Not all snakes subscribe to only one venom type. But the reason we lump these into just 3 basic groups, it's for the medical management of snake bites for doctors. Okay, it makes things much easier to figure out and utilize. I'd like to take you now through the venom types because it's interesting stuff, and what does it mean for us if we get bitten by a snake. Okay, so neurotoxins, everybody, interact with the nerve and the muscle of the body. Okay, and in South Africa we have neurotoxic species. There are the Mambas and the non-spitting cobras. Guess how many deadly neurotoxic snakes Hoedspruit has? Remember, we've got lots of snakes. We've only got 2 species that can kill you. Okay, the black mamba and the snouted cobra, both very common snakes. Now, what happens is, under normal circumstances, the nerve interacts with the muscle by exchanging certain chemicals, and this results in the formation of a nerve impulse. The nerve sends the impulse to the muscle does the job that it's supposed to do, and we move around. What happens with neurotoxins is that they block this area between them, the synapse, either by attaching onto the muscle side or the nerve side, but it interferes with this communication, and the result is paralysis. Okay, the scary thing about these venoms is it can act very quickly. People may be struggling to breathe and have difficulty standing up within 20 or 30 minutes from a bad neurotoxic bite. The good news, however, is that these don't damage the nerve or the muscle. So when people make a recovery, it really is a full recovery with no negative physical side effects. There might be a little bit of psychological trauma, but so far as the body goes, it's a very good thing to recover from. Let's have a look at some of these symptoms. Sure, this is a lot of writing. Don't panic if you don't remember all of this, okay? What I want you to try and remember is PW, progressive weakness. How do I know if I've been bitten by a neurotoxic snake? Very quickly, I'm going to get weaker and weaker, and eventually I can't even stand upright. Now, you know you've been envenomated, because right at the bite site, generally people experience a tingly, burning kind of sensation. This is cue that you have been envenomated, followed very quickly by this sensation spreading to the ears, the nose, the fingers, and the toes, so the extremities. Sometimes the vision, your vision is affected, starting out as blurry vision, tunnel vision even sometimes, but it's all these neurotoxins interfering with how the body normally functions. People have difficulty swallowing. They hypersalivate because their tongue just not really working in the mouth the way that it's supposed to, and you can't swallow all the saliva that's building up. Particularly with mamba bites, we see a lot of people having this metallic taste in their mouth as well. All neurological symptoms. This drooping of the eyelids, this ptosis, it's quite an interesting side effect because it makes people look sleepy almost, you know, but patients are not sleepy. They literally cannot open their eyes. The venom is paralyzing the muscles that control your eyelids. Now, eventually it's going to affect the bigger groups of muscles, the muscles that keep us upright, and people really are going to get weak. People complain about a difficulty breathing, heavy sensation like somebody standing on their chest, that sort of thing, and eventually somebody might collapse on the ground. Now, it's very important that we remember that it's usually not the venom that kills the patient, it's the side effect of the venom. So the venom is causing paralysis. What's affecting the person is a lack of oxygen. So if you can do CPR and you can keep somebody alive by providing oxygen into their mouths, or into their lungs rather, and distributing that by doing artificial heartbeats, you can actually keep a person alive long enough for an ambulance to get there, take over, and that person should be absolutely fine. You don't even need anti-venom always when it comes to these kinds of bites. If you get put on life support in a hospital setting, body breaks down the venom in a very normal, natural kind of way. You stay in this coma-like state for about a week or so, and then you wake up and everything's really kind of okay. You're probably not going to be catching or killing snakes again though. Okay, let's have a look at the cytotoxins. These are the problematic venom types. Now, cytotoxins affect the body by causing a osmotic change, or a change in osmotic potential of the cells. Now, what that does is it causes the fluid in the body to move into the cell expands, and then it explodes. Other toxins damage the cell membrane, and they kind of end up doing the same sort of thing. So in South Africa, snakes with cytotoxins are all the little adders. So any snake that has adder in the name is generally cytotoxic, with the exception of the bird adder, which we don't really need to worry too much about in Hoedspruit. Spitting cobras all have predominantly cytotoxic venoms, and I've included the rinkhouse because it looks like a cobra, it behaves like a cobra, but it's not a cobra for a whole bunch of other reasons. And the stiletto snake, which I'll come back to in a moment. Let's have a look at the symptoms. Now, these are the problematic ones because they cause permanent side effects, permanent tissue damage. So try to remember PPS, painful progressive swelling. How do I know if I've been bitten by a cytotoxic snake? Just remember the rhyme. If it hurts like hell and begins to swell. Many snake bites are going to be pain, but this is pain on another level. If I speak to some people that I know that have been bitten by puff adders, for example, people say it's like taking boiling hot water, injecting it into your hand, and then taking a hammer and whacking it. And the pain doesn't subside, it gets worse. You know, you expect things to wax and wane, but the longer the venom is active in the system, the more painful it becomes. So it is extremely, extremely painful. Most bites are going to be bleeding out of the site of the bite because of the tissue damage, and then followed very quickly is the swelling. Now, if you're bit by something like a spitting cobra with small fangs, the swelling generally tends to be more or less sort of skin deep and skin level, but if it's a big snake like a puff adder or a gaboon viper with hinged fangs, then that swelling is much deeper. And it can cause circulation issues, and we call this compartment syndrome. So imagine being bitten, talking here about that picture of the arm, the swelling is so severe that it actually cuts off the circulation. Now, in a very bad situation, that may lead to amputation, because if any part of the body is without oxygen for long enough, that tissue begins to die and it may have to be removed. So years and years ago, doctors used to do something called a fasciotomy, and I'll explain why I said years and years ago in a second. That's this picture here. You take a scalpel blade, you cut right down that area, normally right down to the bone, and what that does is alleviates the buildup of pressure, allowing the veins and arteries to open and restoring circulation to vulnerable areas like the fingers and the toes. We now know that compartment syndrome is not it's not as common as what we used to think. If we just leave the bites, even in cases where it's super swollen, generally the circulation isn't too badly compromised. to recover from a wound like that is going to take many, many months, lots of plastic surgery, and it's going to be a very painful sort of process. Luckily, today, that's very, very rarely done. Now, coupled with the swelling after perhaps a day of a bite, you might see the formation of blisters. So having a look at that arm again. Now, the problem with blisters is that they fill up with fluid, and eventually they can't contain that fluid, and they pop and they burst. They expose the wound to outside bacteria, and it becomes infected very, very easily. To keep a bite like this clean, even in a hospital setting with fresh dressing and antibiotics, is super difficult, and necrosis sets in. This is when the tissue dies and it blackens, and it has to be removed. So people end up having huge portions of body parts cut out to prevent this necrosis from actually spreading. Now, the only thing that can stop this is anti-venom. And it's very, very important in the industry. We say time is tissue. The faster you get to hospital, the faster we can give you anti-venom, the quicker you can prevent this kind of thing from happening. But essentially, anti-venom is very effective on these kinds of bites. And imagine this level of destruction around your kidneys and your liver. When people do die from these kinds of bites, it's normally a couple of days after the bite. Sometimes if it's before then it has something to do with other complications. But the good news is, cytotoxic venoms, you've got a little bit of time. So you should get to hospital. You should be able to get treatment without this kind of thing being too serious. Okay, this is the stiletto snake. Anybody seen this guy before? This stiletto snake, guys, super common in Hoedspruit. Snake season is around the corner. When we get heavy rain, these snakes that generally live under the ground are flooded out of their little hidey holes by all the water that seeps in through the soil. They're then exposed and they move around, and this is when brave people come along and pick them up. The problem is this snake doesn't really look dangerous in any real obvious kind of way, but it cannot be safely handled with your hands at all. Even us at the snake park, we get called out to catch a stiletto snake. It's a big long set of snake tongs. We don't go near it with our hands. If you pick the snake up with your tail, it's a whippy little guy. He's going to turn around, he's going to bite you on the hand. If you grab the snake behind the head, like you've seen on television, their very unusual fangs, which are quite long, are simply going to pop out one side and they're going to get you on the thumb. It cannot be handled with the hands, so please don't. Be very careful of any darkly colored snake. They're about so big that is out after the rains. People mistake them for fowl snakes, for herald snakes, for wolf snakes, all these other snakes that are generally quite harmless to people. So do not pick up snakes after the rain if they look like this guy here. By the way, the name stiletto comes from the snake's defensive posture, which is to arch the neck up like that, and it's supposed to look like a stiletto shoe. Ladies, does it? I don't really know what a stiletto shoe looks like. It's supposed to. Okay, so leave this guy alone. Doesn't mean you have to kill it, just leave it alone. Okay, the last venom type is the blood-affecting venoms. Now, blood-affecting venoms can affect the body in different ways. In South Africa, we have two snakes of medical significance, the boomslang and the vine snake. Both snakes disrupt the blood's clotting mechanism. Other species, excuse me, lower the blood pressure, resulting in shock, and obviously shock is a very serious kind of medical condition. Now, when it comes to many of the hemotoxic snakes in the world, they particularly affect a protein in the body called fibrin. Okay, fibrin, when it's activated, comes together and it forms these little clumps, and these clumps come together and they form little strands, and these strands come together and they form a net-like structure. Now, this net-like structure captures and holds onto the red blood cells in the body, and the platelet, it gets very sticky and it dries to form a scab. That's your body's ordinary clotting process. Of a boomslang or vine snake bite. By the way, if you've heard that there is no anti-venom for vine snake, that is correct. Okay, there is none, not because we can't make one, it's because so few people get bitten by vine snakes every single year that it's just not economically feasible. Okay, so what we want to try to remember is the progressive bleeding. Now, you'll be bleeding out of the initial bite site, because remember that these rear fang snakes have to bite on, they've got to chew a little bit, and because of that you will probably see the bite happening. You'll see a snake attached to your arm or your leg. It's not that you'll be walking in the bush, feel a scratch, and there's a snake disappearing and you're not really
you.